I did go to Diana's coffin the day after I'd written it, and I read it to her in there, and I did sort of feel a sort of
innocence about her. You just thought, wow.
The palace fell into a profound silence as the morning sun rose over Windsor, its pale light sifting through a mist that softened the ancient stone, brushing the walls as if hesitant to disturb them. It was a day that should have been ordinary, predictable, filled with calm routines and the quiet cadence of royal life. Yet the stillness that hung inside the palace carried a weight that pressed upon every corridor, every hallway, every hidden chamber. Where once the air had vibrated with the soft hum of staff, the echo of footsteps over polished floors and the occasional laughter or whisper, now there was only a suspended hush, a tension so taut it seemed the very walls were holding their breath. Footsteps softened to near silence, whispers lingered with uncertainty, and even the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the west corridor seemed hesitant, reluctant to mark the passing of time. Royal aides moved with quiet urgency, their glances drawn to closed doors, their words clipped, evasive, weighed with the knowledge of what they could not say. Outside, speculation about the Princess of Wales had rippled through the world for days, carried by news agencies, royal correspondents, and anxious subjects. Yet the palace's carefully phrased statements, brief, composed, and ostensibly reassuring, concealed the fragile truth within. Catherine, beloved by millions, had been under hospital care for weeks, and though the public was told she was resting and recovering, the reality inside Windsor was far more delicate, threaded with worry and silent dread. Doctors moved in and out of her suite with solemn precision. The normally hidden medical wing transformed into the center of a kingdom's concern, a quiet locus of life and fear measured in digital pulses. Prince William scarcely left her side, pacing the hospital corridors with restless energy, clutching his phone, eyes darting at every message as if a miracle might arrive through one. He spoke little unless necessary, slept only when exhaustion forced him, and even then his rest was shallow, haunted by a singular, consuming purpose: to remain near her, to hope and to pray. To the outside world, he maintained the composed, stoic facade of a monarch in waiting. Yet in private, the veneer had begun to crack. The calm assurance once evident in his eyes wavered. The voice that commanded ceremonies and speeches faltered when he spoke her name. That morning began like all others, until a nurse appeared at the end of the hallway, her posture impeccable, her face serene. Yet her eyes betrayed a tremor that belied her professionalism. She approached William slowly and respectfully, and in a quiet, measured voice said simply, "She's asking for you, Your Royal Highness." A few words, yet in that instant, time itself seemed to lose its order. Outside, the world press, ceremony, expectation ceased to exist. There was only that room, only that woman. William rose quietly, his breath shallow, his mind weighed with the knowledge that no doors he had ever walked through, council chambers, battlefields, grand halls, had ever felt as daunting as this one. Stepping inside, he was met by the muted hum of life measured in digital pulses, and there lay Catherine, pale yet radiant, the grace and light that had always defined her shining even in this fragile moment. She turned her head, smiled faintly, and in that smile so effortlessly composed, so filled with gentle calm, was no fear, only peace. William took her hand, cool, delicate, yet possessing a quiet strength that conveyed more than words ever could. For a long moment they shared silence, a language of love, of fear, of surrender, of hope that rendered speech unnecessary. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice soft, barely above a whisper, yet each word seemed carved into the air itself, urging him to smile for the people, to carry hope in his eyes even in her absence, to tell their children stories that would make them laugh, to protect their joy from grief. William's chest tightened, his heart fractured in anticipation of a loss he had long feared yet could never truly prepare for. He pressed her hand to his lips, whispered against it, tried to reject the inevitability, but her slow, knowing smile reached her eyes, steady and full of unshakable resolve. "You've always been my strength," she murmured, "and I have always been your peace." Her words broke through the armor of duty he had spent his life cultivating, the teachings that had told him to suppress emotion, to stand unflinching before the world. In that moment, all that mattered was love, the quiet, transcendent, eternal love that defies crowns, kingdoms, and titles. She spoke of heaven and presence, of goodbyes that begin long before words are spoken, of watching over the family they had built. Even as she faced the end, William closed his eyes, tears tracing paths down his face that no public eye would ever see, pressed his forehead to her hand, whispered memories, apologies, and promises meant only for her. When he finally rose, his body was heavy, his heart shattered, yet somehow it still beat, carrying purpose, carrying the weight of her final gift, hope. As he walked back through the corridors, the nurse waiting silently, their shared gaze spoke everything words could not. The palace, its walls, its portraits, its endless echoes of lineage, felt heartbreak as any ordinary home might, and the hush that settled over Windsor was heavier this time, filled with a quiet reverence for love, loss, and the sacred ending of a chapter no one outside could yet understand. The room was still, suspended between two worlds, as if holding its breath, and even the monitors seemed to pulse more gently, reverent of the sacredness within. The medical staff had retreated to the outer corridor, leaving Prince William motionless at Catherine's bedside, fingers tightening around hers, unable to find words that could bear the weight of what lingered unspoken. She gazed at him, memorizing his face with a strength that was startling even in fragility, the same woman who had stood by him through storms both public and private, who had balanced crown, motherhood and grace, and now, even in her weakening, radiated quiet majesty. "Do you remember the first time we brought George to the balcony?" she whispered, and he nodded, faintly smiling at the memory of her admonishing him not to wave too much, and of course he had, trying to make their son laugh while the world watched. Her laugh, light and fleeting, trembled in his hand as she reminded him of these simple joys, the ordinary moments now feeling immense, and for a while they clung to fragments of a life that had seemed eternal. "Promise me," she said, voice thinner now, "that you'll never let them forget the sound of laughter in this house." He closed his eyes, voice breaking, and promised, and she smiled faintly, teasing him as she always did about night calls he had never taken lightly. Her eyes drifted to the shifting golden sunlight, and with calm certainty, she spoke of fearlessness, of goodness she had seen in him, the children, and the people whose lives they had touched, urging him to hold on to that light even as she prepared him to face what she could not escape. They spoke then of love and bravery, of how love had made them both strong, how he had made her brave, and in that quiet room, their hearts spoke where words could not, each whisper and brush of a hand heavy with eternity. She urged him to smile for life, not duty, and he pressed her hand to his chest, trembling, unable to imagine the days ahead without her, yet she reassured him that he already carried her strength. Every second hung suspended, every heartbeat measured, until a faint shiver passed through her and her breath slowed. He wanted to call for help, to beg for more time, but she shook her head, and he stayed, holding her hand as she smiled that soft, radiant smile, spoke of her love for their children, and whispered that heaven had its own way of staying near. Her fingers tightened once more in his, a final echo of life, and then lay still. The machines hummed softly, the morning light spilling fully across her serene face. William bowed his head, weeping quietly, humanly, reverently, until a nurse entered, eyes wet, silently drawing the curtain. Outside, the palace clock struck. Life continuing as always, yet within those walls, everything had shifted. He lingered, memorizing her face, the trace of peace left behind, and when he finally rose, the nurse offered a cloth, and he walked down the corridors past gilded portraits of monarchs and ancestors, feeling the weight of legacy, crown, and destiny crushed by the unbearable loneliness of loss. At the chapel doorway, he paused, whispered a final, "Good night, my darling," to the room that had held their love, and stepped forward into what would be the longest night of his life, the corridors of Windsor bearing witness to grief that had never been meant for their stone walls. Yet now stretched through them like a quiet, unbroken tide, they carried only silence, the kind that moved like fog through old stone and polished wood. Servants glided softly, unsure whether to speak or bow, as though any acknowledgment might disturb the fragile air. Prince William sat alone in the chapel, the faint scent of candles mingling with cold marble and echoes of ancient prayers. His military jacket lay forgotten beside him. The crown's weight had dissolved into the simple, human grief of a man mourning his wife. Morning light filtered through stained glass, crimson and blue spilling across the pews like a painting of sorrow. He did not cry aloud. His grief was quiet, internal, a weight settling into the bones and refusing to leave. For a long while, no one approached, and even seasoned courtiers who had served generations of monarchs seemed lost. Finally, Camilla, the queen consort, entered. Her steps were soft, her face pale but steady. She said nothing at first, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. She was light, William murmured, voice barely audible. Every room she entered felt alive. Camilla's eyes glistened, and she nodded. "And she still is, William. Light doesn't die. It just changes form." He turned to her, stripped of the royal composure the world expected. "How do you keep breathing?" he asked, "when the air no longer feels like it belongs to you?" Camilla paused, then said, "You remember that the air is filled with them. Every breath carries the love that never left." It was a truth carved from lived loss, the kind that only someone who had truly mourned could offer. Outside, preparations had already begun. The chief press secretary conferred quietly with royal aides, choosing each word of the inevitable announcement with care, rehearsing phrasing that would carry dignity without excess emotion. But inside, hearts were breaking in silence. In another wing, King Charles waited, aged years in a matter of hours. The voice that had guided his son through countless duties now cracked with sorrow. When William entered, father and son met wordlessly, bound not by protocol but by shared loss. Charles rose, and without speeches or ceremony, simply embraced his son. William's shoulders shook, the crown's weight dissolved in his father's arms. "Take time," Charles whispered. "The nation will wait." But William, ever the soldier, shook his head. "She wouldn't want to delay. She'd want me to keep going for the children." The king nodded, eyes betraying understanding. "Then let the nation grieve with you. You do not need to carry this alone." By evening, the first vigil began. Candles flickered outside Buckingham Palace as thousands gathered in silence, holding flowers, photographs, and letters. No royal directive had called them. They came drawn by love, by shock, by instinct, to mourn a woman who had felt more like family than royalty. Television crews arrived, but spoke softly, reverent, their words tempered by sincerity. "The nation waits," one anchor said quietly, "for confirmation of what many already fear." Inside, William sat with his children. The nursery remained painfully unchanged. The same books, the same toys, the faint scent of Catherine's perfume lingering on pillows she had kissed goodnight. George sat closest, hand on his father's knee. Charlotte's wide, uncertain eyes darted between her siblings. Louis leaned against William's arm, too young to grasp the permanence of loss, yet sensing the change in the air. William swallowed hard, voice steadying as he spoke. "Mommy loved you more than words can say," he whispered. "And she told me something just for us." George's lip trembled. "What did she say, Papa?" William hesitated, the memory of her voice at once healing and unbearable. "She said that when we see each other smile, we'll see her too. Every time we laugh, she'll be near." Silence followed. Then Charlotte climbed into his lap, whispering, Can she see us now? William's throat tightened. Yes, my darling, she's watching us right now. Little Louis pointed toward the window. Is she in the stars? William smiled through tears. Yes, maybe she's the brightest one. Their innocence cut deeper than any headline ever could. For all the centuries of royal history surrounding them, this was simply a father holding his children, a family shattered but still breathing. In the hallway, Carol and Michael Middleton stood quietly, arms around each other, dignified yet profoundly grieving their daughter. Palace staff, hardened by decades of duty, averted their eyes, many fighting tears of their own. That night, Windsor slept uneasily. The palace, so often alive with preparation for ceremony, now felt like a mausoleum. Portraits of past monarchs observed in painted silence, as though sensing the absence of the light that had once dwelled within these walls. Near midnight, William returned to the chapel. He lit a single candle at the altar where he had sat that morning. The flame flickered, then steadied, reflecting in his tear-streaked eyes. He knelt, hands loosely clasped, whispering, "Thank you." No elaboration was needed. The words carried grief, love, faith, gratitude, and fragile acceptance. The woman who had defined his world had left him a mission far greater than himself. Outside, the wind rustled the magnolia she had loved, a small, almost unnoticed sound. Yet William heard it, as if the world itself sighed with him. By dawn, the press office released the statement, 37 words chosen with care. The Princess of Wales passed peacefully, surrounded by her family. Her kindness, courage, and grace will be remembered by the world she touched. News spread with quiet devastation. Bells tolled across cities, flags lowered to half-mast, and as the sun rose over Windsor, the palace remained still, its heart forever changed. Across Britain, life paused. Commuters froze mid-step, shopkeepers hesitated before opening doors. The hum of a waking nation softened into collective disbelief. At Kensington Palace, mothers with prams, veterans in medals, school children clutching flowers gathered at the black iron gates. Once the scene of tributes for another lost princess decades before. Bouquets of lilies, roses, and wildflowers, each with handwritten notes. She was our hope, one read. Another said simply, "Thank you, Catherine, for teaching us grace." By midday, the crowd had swelled to thousands. Television cameras rolled, but reporters spoke softly, fearing to break the reverence. At Westminster Abbey, the great bells tolled their solemn rhythm through the autumn air. Flags across the Commonwealth lowered to half-mast, and in Edinburgh, Sydney, Ottawa, and Wellington, public vigils formed, a quiet chorus of mourning that spanned continents. Silence moved through the palace like fog over stone and polished wood. Servants tread softly, unsure whether to speak or bow, as though any sound might shatter the fragile air. Prince William sat alone in the chapel. His military jacket lay forgotten beside him. The crown felt distant. Here was a man simply mourning his wife. Morning light streamed through stained glass, casting threads of crimson and blue across the pews, painting sorrow in color, but he did not cry aloud. His grief was quiet, internal, the kind that sinks into the bones. For a time no one approached. Even seasoned courtiers seemed at a loss. Finally, Camilla, the queen consort, entered. Her steps were soft, her presence steady. She rested a hand on his shoulder. She was light, William whispered. Every room she entered felt alive. And she still is, Camilla said gently. Light doesn't die. It just changes form. How do you keep breathing, he asked softly, when the air no longer feels like it belongs to you? You remember that the air is filled with them, she said. Every breath carries the love that never left. Outside, preparations began quietly. Statements were rehearsed, words chosen for dignity, but behind the formality, hearts were breaking. King Charles waited in another wing, aged by grief. When William finally entered, there were no speeches, no protocol, just an embrace. Take your time, Charles whispered. The nation will wait. She wouldn't want to delay, William replied. She'd want me to keep going for the children. By evening, the first vigil began. Candles flickered outside Buckingham Palace. Thousands arrived spontaneously, drawn by love and shock, carrying flowers and letters. Television crews whispered, respecting the unspoken solemnity. Inside, William sat with his children in the nursery, the faint scent of Catherine lingering. Mommy loved you more than words can say, he whispered. She told me that when we smile and laugh, we see her too. Charlotte asked softly, can she see us now? Yes, William said, she's watching right now, their innocence cut deeper than any headline. Beyond the palace, mothers, veterans, and children brought flowers to Kensington Palace, leaving notes that spoke of hope, gratitude, and love. Across the nation, bells tolled. Flags lowered to half-mast. The collective grief transcended protocol. I end the days that followed. The palace returned to quiet routine, but everything felt changed. William guided his children through grief, walking them in the gardens Catherine had loved. He continued her charitable work privately, commissioning a small statue in her honor, showing her kindness in repose. Children around her the memorial service. The world gathered, yet the tone was intimate. William spoke, not as a prince, but as a husband, a father, a man learning to live without his other half. She was my compass, he said. She showed me how to lead without hardness, how to serve without pride. Catherine believed kindness could rebuild the world, one act at a time. And she was right. I see it now in our children, in the people she touched, in countless lives changed by her quiet devotion. I ask you not to mourn her absence, but to carry her example forward. Live her kindness, share her gentleness, let her light guide you as it guides us. The crowd rose in silent unity. Bells echoed across the fields. In the quiet days afterward, William continued bedtime stories, charity visits, and walks in the gardens. Each act was a conversation with her spirit, each act of service a way of keeping her near. History would remember Catherine as the Princess of Wales, the wife of a future king. But to William, she remained his home, his anchor, his reason. Her greatest legacy was not ceremony, but love, quiet, steadfast, and humble. Love that reminded the world that behind every crown beats a human heart, capable of breaking, capable of healing, and capable of hope.